Good morning, and welcome to the second of our Advent devotionals. This one, again, being taken from Almost Christmas, a Wesleyan Advent experience. The devotion we're looking at today was written by Reverend Sam McLaughlin. And let's get to it. During Sam's senior year of college, Sam had lived in a house with a bunch of roommates. They called the house the castle. One of the bedrooms, he says, even had a spire as the ceiling. And as he found graduation time coming near, he entered into his times of reflection, sitting out in the sun on a large wooden swing that hung from this beautiful, massive live oak tree. There, one day, he and a friend had gone out and were sitting and talking. This was a friend he knew pretty well. They had served on a crew team together, and so they knew quite a bit about each other. And they had been sitting there talking about their plans for the upcoming summer and so forth. And so Sam began talking with great enthusiasm and passion about working again at Mountaintop, which was a Christian summer camp that he had worked at for a couple of years. And as he was sitting there, even filled with this excitement and passion, his friend kind of looked at him and there was a pause. And then the friend said, I didn't know you were a Christian. Sam recalls this kind of hush coming over the moment, and he remembers his own eyes being filled with a bit of disbelief as he looked at his friend. He felt embarrassed, hurt. He began thinking to himself, what? I spend hours working in ministry. I lead huge camps of people spiritually. I even preach. And yet his friend's observations swept over him in the next couple of hours, and he began realizing that he was mad at himself. And the question that kept coming up to him was, why didn't his life speak of his love of God? As Christians, Sam reminds us that we are called to self-examination at every point in our spiritual journey. John Wesley's question was written this way: do I even appear on the outside as a Christian? Take that in for just a moment. Do I even appear on the outside as to be a Christian? It reminds us that what we may feel and what may seem so painfully obvious to us may not be being expressed well in our day-to-day living or in our actions. But Sam tells us if we are courageous enough to give our practice an honest and faithful look, God will help weave our beliefs and our actions together even more tightly. This Advent, he challenges us to strive for our outward behaviors to reflect the hope and expectation we feel inside as we long for Christ's coming. Sam had a completely opposite experience just a couple of years before that overwhelming experience. And it happened right after he had returned home from working at a summer mountaintop camp. And this time it was with a friend named Paige. And Paige's response was totally different. In fact, Paige's response was, something is different about you. What Paige saw in Sam was this fire and joy from the mountaintop experience. He recalls that all summer he had studied the scriptures, and he had worshiped God out under the stars, that he had listened to youth tell stories about hope and transformation. He had seen children and families find shelter and friendship and new life in partnership with these youth. And he had received his own call to ordained ministry. It was being nurtured as mentors and campers continually brought up to him the gifts of God that they saw revealed in his life. Quite different experience. One of the hardest tasks, Sam says, as Christians is that when we leave worship or a service trip or a mountaintop experience of some sort, that where we have experienced this very thin veil between heaven and earth, and we're trying desperately to hold on to that as we re-enter our worlds. That's difficult. Perhaps we feel closer to God during Advent worship, or maybe there's been some experience where we have been in mission or ministry to others that we have really felt the nearness of God, sort of like the devotion that was shared yesterday, with that experience of encountering those people in great need, how the writer had just experienced a closeness of God that he had not felt before. I mean, perhaps for you, it's just something that happens during this time of year with all the family and fellowship, that you feel very close to God. Whatever, Sam says it may be, we have to leave these places where we have tasted and seen the goodness of the Lord, and we have to go out with the intention of positioning ourselves daily before God, so that we can create a space where we can encounter God, where we'll be better suited and set to live a life filled with the love as we rise and go out. As we wear our encounters with God, he says, as we wake up and clothe ourselves with Christ and the fruit of the Spirit, people will then begin to ask, why are you so joyful? What's different about you? How are you so confident in your sorrow? Sam says our personal, sacred encounters become our everyday, ordinary witness. Our stories become our invitation into the redemptive and abundant life offered in Jesus Christ. As we begin to weave together what we have felt in the encounter of Christ into our everyday living, this devotion reminds us that it is in those moments that we will give witness to our faith. I encourage you this second day of Advent to dare to take a closer look. Does it even appear on the outside that we are Christians? And if it doesn't, don't lose hope. Make a plan to find opportunities to encounter God and weave that into your everyday living. Blessings, my friends.